I never thought a simple walking path could turn my life upside down. When I first moved into the neighborhood in Texas, everything looked perfect on paper. Clean streets, well-maintained houses, kids riding bikes in the evening, and that calm suburban silence that people dream about. It was the kind of place where you think, yeah, I can finally breathe here. My house was at the edge of the community, near a small greenbelt area. And right behind my backyard fence, there was a narrow dirt path cutting through the grass. Locals called it the shortcut. It connected the main road to a small plaza, coffee shop, grocery store, pharmacy, everything you needed within a 5-minute walk. When I first saw it, I didn't think much of it. It looked harmless. People used it casually, neighbors, joggers, even kids going to school. It wasn't on my property technically, but it ran just a few feet behind my fence line, close enough that I could hear everything happening there. At first, I didn't mind it. In fact, I liked it. It gave life to the otherwise quiet backyard. In the mornings, I could hear birds and soft footsteps. In the evenings, people chatting, laughing, sometimes even greeting each other. It made the place feel alive. It made me feel like I was part of something, a real community. I remember standing in my backyard on that first Saturday morning, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise. A couple jogged by. An elderly man walked his dog. A mom pushed a stroller while talking on the phone. It felt normal, peaceful. I thought to myself, this is exactly what I wanted. But I didn't know that shortcut had a history. And I definitely didn't know it was about to become the center of my life. The first sign of trouble. About 2 weeks after I moved in, I noticed something strange. A small group of people had started gathering right near my back fence. Not on the path, but right beside it. They weren't just passing through anymore. They were stopping, hanging out. They were loud, leaving trash. Sometimes even sitting on my fence line like it was a bench. The first time I saw it, I was confused. I went to my kitchen window and looked out. For teenagers, sitting on the ground. Energy drinks scattered around them. One of them had a Bluetooth speaker playing music. Not crazy loud, but loud enough. I waited a few minutes, thinking they'd move on. They didn't. So I went outside. I walked up to the fence, smiled, and said as politely as I could, "Hey guys, I don't mean to bother you, but could you maybe hang out somewhere else? You're kind of right up against my property here." One of them looked up at me. He didn't look angry, just unbothered. He shrugged and said, "Relax, man. It's not your land." Another one added, "Yeah, it's a public path. We're allowed to be here." I stood there for a second, trying to process that. Technically, they were right. The path itself wasn't mine, but they were close enough to touch my fence. Close enough that I could hear every word they said. Still, I didn't want to start a fight. I nodded, said, "All right, just keep it down, okay?" And I went back inside. But that line stuck with me. "It's not your land." Something about the way he said it felt dismissive, like my concern didn't matter at all. Still, I tried to let it go. I didn't want to be that new guy who complains about everything. I figured it was a one-time thing. But I was wrong. The shortcut becomes a problem. Within a month, that quiet walking path turned into a highway. Every single morning, starting around 6:30 a.m., I'd hear footsteps. Dozens of them. People rushing to work. Students heading to the bus stop. Delivery drivers cutting through to save time. It wasn't occasional anymore. It was constant. And it wasn't just the noise. Things started happening. One morning, I found a crumpled fast food bag thrown into my yard. A few days later, an empty soda can. Then I noticed one of my plant pots near the fence was cracked, like someone had kicked it or knocked it over. There were footprints in the soil along my fence line. Fresh ones. Every single day. People weren't just using the path anymore. They were getting careless. Reckless. Some of them would lean on my fence while tying their shoes. Others would peek over it while talking on their phones. One guy even rested his coffee cup on top of my fence post and left it there. I started feeling like a zoo animal, like I was being watched in my own backyard. I couldn't relax anymore. Every time I stepped outside, there was someone there, walking, talking, staring. I tried addressing it again, politely, calmly. I'd go outside and say, "Hey, could you please not lean on my fence?" Or, "Can you take your trash with you?" You know what most of them did? They'd look at me like I was crazy. Some ignored me completely. Others would mumble something under their breath and walk away. One woman actually rolled her eyes and said, "It's just a path. Get over it. Get over it." Like my privacy meant nothing. That's when I realized this wasn't going to stop on its own. So I decided to take it to the HOA. The HOA's first decision. I sent them a detailed email. I explained everything. The noise, the littering, the damage to my property, the complete lack of respect for boundaries. I even attached photos. The cracked pot, the trash, the footprints. 2 days later, I got a response. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We take all resident concerns seriously. We will review the matter and take appropriate action. Okay, that sounded promising. A few days later, a notice went out to the entire neighborhood. The community shortcut path is temporarily closed for maintenance and safety evaluation. I read that notice 3 times. Closed. They actually closed it. I felt this huge wave of relief. Like finally, someone heard me. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No footsteps. No voices. No one peeking over my fence. Just peace. I made my coffee and sat outside in my backyard. The air felt different. Lighter. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I remember thinking, this is what home is supposed to feel like. I was so grateful. I actually sent the HOA a thank you email. But that feeling didn't last long. The HOA reopens the shortcut. About a week later, I got another notice in my mailbox. I opened it casually, expecting maybe an update or a newsletter. But it wasn't. It was a new announcement. After reviewing community feedback and accessibility needs, the board has decided to reopen the shortcut path effective immediately. We appreciate everyone's patience. I read it again. Then again. Reopened? I stood there in my driveway, holding that piece of paper, completely stunned. They reopened it. Just like that. No warning. No explanation. No follow-up with me. I immediately called the HOA office. A woman answered. I explained who I was and asked why the path was reopened. She sighed, like I was bothering her. Sir, the board received feedback from multiple residents. The path provides important access to local businesses and services. Closing it permanently would inconvenience the majority of the community. But I filed a complaint, I said. With photos. With evidence. Did anyone even look at it? Your concerns were noted. But the decision was made in the best interest of the community as a whole. What about my interest? There was a pause. Then she said, in the most corporate tone possible, we appreciate your feedback. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I hung up. I just stood there, staring at my phone, feeling completely powerless. They didn't care. They heard me. They acknowledged the problem. And then they chose everyone else. That evening, I watched from my window as people started using the path again. And I swear, some of them looked smug. Like they knew. Like they knew I'd tried to fight back, and lost. One teenager even glanced at my house and smiled. That's when something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. If the system wouldn't protect me, I'd have to protect myself. The breaking point. The next morning, I woke up to a loud bang. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. A kid, maybe 16 or 17, had thrown his backpack against my fence while waiting for his friends. I didn't even think. I went straight outside. Hey, I called out. Don't do that. He looked at me. Not guilty. Not sorry. Just annoyed. Do what? Don't throw stuff at my fence. He laughed. Actually laughed. Bro, it's just a fence. Chill out. His friend snickered. And they walked away. Just like that. I stood there, fists clenched, heart pounding. It's just a fence. That's when I realized something. To them, I didn't exist. My home. My space. My peace. None of it mattered. Because they had the right to be there. And I didn't have the right to stop them. But that was about to change. The plan. I spent the next few days doing research. I pulled up property maps. Reviewed HOA bylaws. Read city ordinances. Looked into easement laws. I needed to know exactly where my property line was. What I could and couldn't do. And then I found it. A small strip of land right near my back gate. It was mine. Fully mine. And according to county records, I had every legal right to build on it. So I made a decision. I was going to install a gate. Not to block the entire path. I wasn't trying to start a war. But I was going to control access on my side. If people wanted to use the shortcut, fine. But they'd have to respect my boundary while doing it. I contacted a contractor. Got quotes. Reviewed designs. I wanted something solid. Professional. Clean. Not aggressive. Just clear. This is my space. Within 2 weeks, the materials were ordered. And 1 week after that, the gate went up. It was a simple metal gate. Lockable. Neat. It didn't block the path. It just made sure no one could cut through my property or hang around my fence anymore. The contractor finished installing it on a Saturday morning. I stood there, looking at it, and for the first time in months, I felt in control again. But I had no idea what was coming next. Because the moment that gate went up, everything exploded. After that moment with the teenager at my fence, something inside me changed. I stopped thinking emotionally and started thinking strategically. Because I realized something simple, but powerful. No one was going to fix this for me. Not the neighbors. Not the walkers. Not even the HOA. Everyone had already chosen convenience over my privacy. So if I wanted peace back, I had to create it myself. And that meant I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Watching the pattern. For the next few days, I became an observer in my own home. I started keeping notes. Actual notes. I'd sit by my kitchen window with a cup of coffee and just watch. Morning rush, 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Students with backpacks. Office workers in business casual. Joggers with earbuds in. The path was like a conveyor belt. Constant movement. Afternoon was lighter. Mostly elderly people walking their dogs. A few parents with strollers. But evening? Evening was the worst. 5 p.m. to 8 p.m., absolute chaos. Groups of teenagers. Couples holding hands. People talking loudly on their phones. And they didn't just walk through. They stopped. They lingered. Some leaned on my fence while waiting for friends. Others took entire phone calls right there, like it was a park bench. A few even treated the shaded area behind my yard like a resting spot. One evening, I watched a man sit down on the ground, back against my fence, and eat his dinner. Just sitting there, eating, like it was completely normal. And maybe to him, it was. But to me, it felt like an invasion. That's when it hit me. The problem wasn't just the shortcut. It was the complete lack of boundaries. People didn't see this as someone's home. They saw it as public space. And as long as they saw it that way, nothing would change. My first idea, and why it failed. I started small. I didn't want to go nuclear right away. I wanted to try the reasonable approach first. So I put up a sign. A simple, polite sign. Private property, please stay on path. I mounted it on my fence, right where people like to stop. The next morning, I watched from my window to see if it made any difference. A jogger slowed down, read it, and kept running. A teenager glanced at it and laughed. A woman with a stroller didn't even look. By the end of the day, someone had drawn a smiley face on it with a marker. I took the sign down that evening. Okay, fine. So I tried something else. I planted a row of bushes along the fence line. Thick, thorny bushes that would create a natural barrier. It took me an entire weekend. I was sweating, covered in dirt, hands scratched up from the branches. But I thought, this will work. People won't want to get close if there's something in the way. 2 days later, I found trampled branches. Someone had just stepped right through them. The bushes were flattened, broken, like they were nothing. I stood there staring at the damage, and I felt this sinking feeling in my chest. Because I realized people didn't care. They weren't being malicious. They just didn't care. The shortcut was more important than my effort. More important than my space. More important than me. Talking to the neighbors. I decided to try one more thing before going further. I went to a few neighbors directly. People I'd seen using the path regularly. I knocked on doors. Smiled. Kept it friendly. I explained the situation. The noise. The crowding. The lack of privacy. Most of them were polite. They nodded. Said things like, yeah, I can see how that would be annoying. The next morning didn't feel normal. Even before I stepped outside, I could sense it. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but tense. Like the air before a storm. Like something is about to happen. And I was right. The HOA arrives. Around 9 a.m., I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard car doors slam. I looked out the window. 2 cars had pulled up near the greenbelt. Official looking. Clean sedans. HOA board members. And behind them, a small group of neighbors. Maybe 5 or 6 people. I recognized a few of them. Regular path users. They didn't look happy. My stomach tightened. I knew what this was. They didn't even knock first. They walked straight toward my fence line like they had every right to be there. The HOA property manager, same woman from before, stood at the front of the group. She looked at the gate, hands on her hips, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear. This was not approved. I stepped outside. Calmly. Slowly. I wasn't going to hide. I walked up to the fence and said, "It's on my property boundary. It's for privacy and safety." She didn't like that answer. I could see it in her face. Because it didn't give her control. One of the neighbors, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt, chimed in immediately. "This is blocking the shortcut everyone uses." There it was again. Everyone. As if everyone automatically overrides one person's right to peace. I stayed quiet for a moment. Then I said, "It's not blocking anything. The path is still open. This just marks my property line." Another neighbor, a woman with her arms crossed, shook her head. "You can't just build whatever you want." I looked directly at her. "Actually, I can. On my own property." The tension was thick now. You could feel it. The argument escalates. Within minutes, more people started gathering. Joggers slowed down and stopped. Students on their way to the bus veered over to watch. Neighbors came out of their houses. It was no longer just a small HOA issue. It had turned into a spectacle. The property manager raised her voice slightly, trying to regain control. "You cannot restrict public access like this." I took a breath, stayed calm, and said firmly, "I'm not restricting public access. I'm protecting my private space. The shortcut was never meant to run directly behind my fence without any boundaries." That hit different. Because it was true. And everyone knew it. One of the neighbors, a younger guy, maybe late 20s, shouted from the back, "We've used this path for years." I turned toward him, looked him in the eye, and said, not loudly, but clearly, "And I've lived here for weeks with no privacy, no peace, and no respect." Silence. For half a second, nobody spoke. A few people looked uncomfortable. Because that's when it clicked for some of them. This wasn't about convenience anymore. It was about whose space mattered more. And they'd been choosing theirs without even thinking about mine. The decision moment. The HOA manager looked flustered. She turned to the other board members and said, "We need to review this properly." They stepped aside, huddled together. I could see them pointing at papers, looking at the gate, gesturing toward my fence. They were trying to figure out if they could legally force me to remove it. Meanwhile, the crowd just stood there, watching, waiting. Some looked annoyed. Others looked curious. A few, just a few, looked like they were starting to understand my side. I stayed near my back door, arms crossed, heart pounding, because I knew this moment mattered. If they ordered removal, I'd have to decide, comply and lose everything I'd fought for, or refuse and escalate this into a legal battle. I wasn't sure which path I'd take, but I was ready for either. The unexpected twist. After about 20 minutes, felt like an hour, the property manager walked back toward me. Her expression had changed. Less aggressive, more measured. She stopped a few feet from the gate and said, "We've reviewed the property line and the installation boundaries." Everyone leaned in. Even the neighbors went quiet. She continued, "The structure does not violate HOA property rules." A wave of confusion rippled through the crowd. Someone literally said out loud, "Wait, what?" Another person, "So he can keep it?" The manager held up a hand. "However," she added quickly, "access concerns and community impact must be monitored moving forward. If this causes significant disruption, we reserve the right to revisit." In other words, the gate stays. For now. But they were watching. One of the neighbors threw up his hands. "This is ridiculous." Another muttered something under her breath and walked away. But most people just stood there, processing, because they'd expected the HOA to shut me down. And it didn't happen. The moment it became real. That afternoon, after the crowd dispersed, I stood outside and looked at the gate. It was finished. Solid. Clean. Locked. Not blocking the path, but clearly marking where my space began. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Not because I won, but because I'd finally set a boundary that people had to acknowledge. Over the next few days, something interesting happened. People still used the shortcut, but the behavior changed. No one leaned on my fence anymore. No one sat near it. No one treated the area like a rest stop. They walked and kept walking. Because the gate wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a psychological one. It said, "This is private. Respect it." And slowly people did. Aftermath. That evening, I sat in my backyard with a cup of tea. No arguments. No HOA members. No crowds watching me. Just the sound of wind through the trees. A few people walked by on the path. I heard their footsteps. But they were distant now. Passing through. Not invading. And for the first time since I moved in, my space felt like mine again. Not because people disappeared, but because they respected the line that now existed. A week later, a neighbor I hadn't spoken to before knocked on my door. Older guy, quiet type. He said, "I just wanted to say, I get it now." I looked at him, surprised. He continued, "I used that path every day. Never thought about how it affected you. But after seeing all this, I get it." He paused. "You did the right thing." I nodded. Didn't say much. But that moment meant more than any HOA approval ever could. Because it wasn't about being right. It was about being heard. Final reflection. I didn't win in the dramatic sense. There was no celebration. No apology from the HOA. No neighborhood meeting where everyone admitted they were wrong. But I got something more important. Balance. The shortcut still existed. People still used it. But now, there was respect. A boundary. A line that said, "You can pass through, but you can't take over." And that gate. It wasn't just metal and hinges anymore. It was a reminder. That peace doesn't come from asking. It comes from defining what you will and won't allow. And once you do that, everything quietly changes. Not instantly, but permanently. I still live in that house. The gate is still there. And every morning, when I step into my backyard with my coffee, I feel something I didn't feel before. Control. Not over others, but over my own space. And that's worth everything.